Hey BoLS fans, Adam Airy here with another Retro Corner review. Today we're going to be continuing our Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader review. I'm going to be going over the Xeno races today, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. This is where we left off last time. We had just finished up the squats and we were jumping into the Eldar race. The Eldar as a whole, they're a lot more, overall I'd say it's a lot more vague. They hadn't really written an entire book on them yet. They hadn't fleshed out all of the Eldar specifically, but they did allude to a lot of things that we see in the more modern incarnations of Eldar. One of the things that is still there, Craft World Eldar, that's still a thing. Eldar still live on Craft Worlds. They describe them as mile long or tens of miles wide, circular planetary discs almost. So that's different. I've always seen pictures of them as just really, really big spaceships. So yeah, the Eldar as a race, they're elves. let's be honest, they're space elves. They don't talk about the Dark Eldar. They haven't been invented yet, but they do talk about Eldar who have gone over that tipping point of psychotic and malcontent, murderous, or evil. Those are clearly going to become the Dark Eldar. They just haven't gotten around to fleshing that out yet. Some of the weapons they use, though, they are still the same pointy-eared, kind of skinny humans. The weapons they use, this is a shuriken catapult. It looks like a crossbow, and they use las guns, they use las cannons, melt-a-guns, all that stuff too. Again, not fully fleshed out. There's no mention of fusion blasters or any stuff like that. Just, I guess, to keep the rules simple for everybody. They could also breed with humans. That was something, I think that's why they were the next race up. They were the closest to humans as far as breeding and temperament and stuff like that. Extremely long-lived, but they could, they talk about human and Eldar hybrids, from the two parentages there. So stat-wise, I want to point this out too. Weapon skill BS4 across the board. So they started out being able to shoot like they do now. So the newer codexes kind of a nod to this older one where Guardians used to be 3-3 and not as good, and now everybody's 4-4. They are still strength toughness 3, so they're still not the toughest race, but they make that up with their decades and millennia of knowledge and wisdom and technology. They travel the universe through their warp gates. They mention they mention it, but they don't go into too much detail just about the warp gates. They use solar sails to travel the universe, unlike the Imperium, who has the warp generators and stuff like that. But yeah, warp gates, craft worlds floating around. Yeah. So pretty cool stuff. Typical squad. They go over that. I thought that was neat. That each alien section has a typical mercenary squad of what they would look like. Eldar are composed of 5 warriors, including a leader. But then 10 of those would form a whole company. So cool stuff. And then of course going over the random weapon generator and all that stuff on the next 2 pages. This is just a diagram they did of squats versus Eldar. Classic matchup, right? Dwarves versus elves. So again, go over the different equipment. Same stuff that the Imperium guys had. They just had a higher chance of getting some of the more unique weapons and stuff like that. Like I said, the shuriken catapult was a big one. Yeah, that's the Eldar. Next up we have the Orcs and the Orcoid space races. So that's basically Orcs and Gretchin. They're your typical green, everybody's favorite green soccer hooligans here. So anyway... That's how I've always pictured them in my head. The descriptions, again, basically the same as 2 meters tall, long, powerful limbs, big teeth, big jaws, kind of yell and respect power and strength, and will kill you just for being weak. That's an orc for you. They did have Gretchin, who were their little goons that they would make them do runt work and be lackeys and all that fun stuff that we think of when you think of grunts or runts and stuff like that. So moving on, the orc stats are a little different than they were. They've changed quite a bit over time. Weapon skill BS 3, strength 3, tough 4. So they used to be able to shoot a little bit better than they can now, but again, think back to how the shooting mechanics worked in this game, there was a lot more plus and minuses on the chart. So weapon skill 3, so that hasn't really changed too much, but I mean, they're better now, but they shot better as well. So you can kind of tell that the early designs, the orcs were just the intergalactic bad guy. There's a story in the book talking about when orcs and humans first met. It basically, both races saw each other and were like, well, we don't like each other, and thus the galactic war started between orcs and humans, and it's been going on ever since. It's been a long cultural fight between the two. The humans and orcs, pretty much constant war between the two. Orcs still love a good fight. That's still how they respect everybody. Like I mentioned earlier, that's what they like to do. They like to fight. So they don't mention too much about the origins of the orcs or really much of the fungus stuff. But yeah, they leave that kind of vague. Again, it wasn't fully fleshed out yet, and I think that comes later on. But I didn't see any when I read through here. He's talking about how, you know, the resiliency of an orc, where you could cut his head off and sew his head to another body and he'd keep going, or the orcs being made of fungus or any stuff like that. So yeah, and then they get into some more pictures here, of course. Gotta have those. I'll just pause for a second here. Awesome 80s artwork and paint jobs. Gotta love it. They get into Gretchin now. Again, also orc weapons. Everybody uses the same stuff. I think that was more of a simplicity stake. Just bolt pistols, melted guns, las cannons, all that fun stuff. Auto pistols. It was all just different percentages of what the races had as far as what they could get to. So even later on, we'll see the Tyranids have access to the exact same weapons. On that note, Gretchin. Stat-wise, very close to what almost orc-like as far as some of the other stats. I want to point this out too. Weapon skill 2, BS 3, strength 3, toughness 3. So they were more. They couldn't fight in hand-to-hand combat as well, but they were just as good as regular humans when it came to their other stats. This is interesting to me because they're still better shots. They're not better shots than orcs are. So the orcs were obviously the main fighters. When you look at the orc stuff now, the Gretchin are the better shots, but the orcs are the tougher fighter ones. So kind of fits in line with that mentality. You can tell they over time have tweaked that, which is kind of neat. So do like that fact. Gretchin's still described, you know, shorter, scrawnier, squirrelier, still like to eat people. They actually mention one of the things they eat any kind of meat, but human meat is their favoritist type of flavor. So that's the Gretchin. They haven't really changed too much. It doesn't mention anything about them being the technical geniuses of the orcs either. So just that they're kind of in the way a lot of the time and are slave race to the orcs. Weapon generation, same deal. They have access to pretty much the same stuff as everybody else. You'll find that trend again. It's just a tweak on the percentages there. So next up is one of the races that is sort of gone from modern 40K, but you can definitely see the parallel from fantasy, and that's the Slaan. So the Slaan, where to start with these guys? First thing I'd point out with the Slaan, they're the space lizards. Very heavy influence. I don't recall, I think lizardmen were a race, or Slaan were a race in Warhammer Fantasy. So kind of a direct thing over there. Stat wise, these guys are supposed to be the oldest race in the universe. I saw, when I was reading through this section, I saw a lot of parallels in the way they talked about them compared to the Eldar now, as far as like genetically manipulating other races, or you know, Tau for instance, or going in and seeding a world with what they wanted to do. But you know, when you look in the current background, current stuff, the current storyline, they mention a lot of the old ones, and they're kind of referring to the Slaan. So again, stat-wise, they're kind of crappy. Weapon skill 3, BS 2, strength 3, toughness 4, 1 wound each. Intelligence was only a 7. I say only a 7 because for a race that, the way they described, they've almost transcended war and wanting to spread throughout the galaxy. Like, they're all above that at this point, and they're kind of not aloof, but that's the best word I can think of. they still fight and they still believe in having warriors and stuff like that. In fact, some of the younger Slaan, if they get kind of called to be a warrior, they believe that dying in glorious battle is, you know, the warrior's code. So it's again kind of an Aztec-y vibe. Don't know how else to describe them, but they're lizards with a Aztec-y vibe, and I don't know why they have bad stats comparatively. I think that's probably one of the reasons that they kind of scrapped this race eventually, along with the squats, is they didn't feel different enough, or I don't know. It's just you could see they kind of wrote this in here and they allude to it every now and then, but they kind of felt like they don't really have a place in the current, you know, fit. You know, Eldar are fast, the humans are tough. And have good armor. The orcs, there's a bunch of them, and you know, mob rule and all that stuff. Tyranids are the never-ending swarm armies. Necron are the undead. You know, Tau are the new kids on the block with communist weapons, whatever. You know, but the Slaan, they were super psychic. That was one thing. They do have a 90% chance of having psychic, but again, the Eldar had that too. So it was kind of a weird. I don't know. I could see why they had issues with continuing with the Slaan, and now they just refer to them as like the old ones. So, anyway, again, same weapon charts, just higher percentages. They talk about being warriors and stuff that they love a good fight, which is weird because their stats don't reflect being good at fightings. But you know, to die in glorious battle is a-okay with them if that's what they're called to do. So, yeah. Next up, Jokero. So Jokero are described just like they are. Or have been. They're the orangutans of the 40K, you know, game. But they're super smart. It's kind of funny. I looked over here at their stat line. The intelligence is all question marks. So they mentioned in the comments here in the section I was reading that the other races aren't sure if they're intelligent or not. They don't speak, but they totally are intelligent, because if you give them junk, they will make something. If you try to capture them to make the Jokero build for you, they'll build something to escape. So they seem to be able to selectively build what they need at the time. If I could draw a parallel, I would be like, this is the mutant Forge from the X-Men, where he can build whatever he wants when he feels like it. So their stats kind of crappy. They're not the best in close combat with the weapon skill 1. I think they're actually the worst. BS3, so they can shoot. They're strength 2 and tough 3. So a little bit softer than the humans overall. But yeah, they're bigger orangutans. So I wouldn't want to mess with them. But yeah, they can make stuff and blow stuff up too. So equipment wise, same deal. Random. They were a bit more random on the weapons, stuff like that. Personal equipment stuff. So this is just cool 80s artwork that they put in here randomly. I do want to point out, editing wise, this was frustrating. They would start sentences on one page. They do it in the orcs. They start sentences on one page, have a really cool picture, and then the sentence picks up again later on. So it's just like, why would you do that, GW? But it's cool, whatever. So next up we have the Tyranids, and I'm going to try to pull this thing off. Sticky note was upside down, so that's... Anyway, technical difficulties aside, Tyranids. High fleet wise, the Tyranids very similar, described as, you know, the big galactic menace, kind of from the, you know, the cold spots in the ether there coming out, you know, the ether of the Imperium. So yeah, they don't really have a home planet because they move in, they devour the whole planet, leaving a airless rock. Pretty much the same. They're described like this, which is that really awesome picture. If you search online for first edition Tyranid, you'll see what I'm talking about here. But they have the weird hoof section in the middle and like 2 arms on the front, and then webbed feet in the back, long tails. They look like a weird mix of Gaunt and I don't know. I don't want to say Tyranid warrior because they're not upright, but they look like weird Gaunts. That's the best way I can describe them. They're also completely awesome stat-wise, I think, with a movement of 5, which is higher than most other races. Weapon skill, BS4, tough 3, strength 3, so whatever there. But they have 2 wounds standard and 2 attacks base. They're also really smart. I don't know if that's because of the hive mind. They don't really get into all of that. But yeah, for base stat-wise, with 2 wounds and super smart, and just the tough and strength of a regular guy, but weapon skill BS4 across the board. With close combat, these guys are scary. They do go over the hive fleets being run by. There's 13 known hive fleets. First off, and each hive fleet is run by a hive tyrant. The way they describe the hive tyrants, though, it's more like the alien. The queen alien from the movie Aliens. They have the big giant egg sacs, and they're kind of slow and can't really move in their ship, but they control everything else. And then they talk about hive lords, which function as the army and unit leaders. So just some terminology differences there. That's kind of interesting that over time they've changed. They've gotten rid of hive lords completely. They probably made those guys the hive, the Tyranid warriors, and then hive tyrants have become what the hive lords function as. And then there's the big bugs they don't really talk about too much. If you have played Epic or stuff like that, or familiar with any of that stuff, you know what I'm talking about, the dominatrixes and stuff like that within the hive fleet. But yeah, so they've just kind of shuffled that around. I think as they went over the Tyranids more and more and more, they kind of refine that again. It's just first edition stuff. They haven't fleshed everything out, but they get to it. As I mentioned earlier, Tyranids have access to the same weapons everybody else does. As you can see here, bolt pistols, bolt guns, slight tweaks on the percentages here, but it's just odd. They don't really talk about how they mention that they use biological weapons and stuff like that. Their weapons are symbiotic weapons, but then profile-wise, it's the same stuff. Like it acts just like a bolt gun or a shuriken catapult, stuff like that. So melta bombs, all that fun stuff. They do have access to the super rare stuff, needle pistols, neural disruptors, plasma weapons, flamers, all that stuff. So that's kind of weird, but maybe it's a balance thing. They just wanted to make sure everybody had the same weapons, just function differently with the different stats. So Tyranids have that intergalactic threat, really hungry devourer of worlds coming through and eating everything. But their foot soldiers were actually the Zoats. Zoats were those big, centaur, like reptile centaur guys. You can kind of see a picture of them here. 4 legs, 2 big arms. They're really massive. They're really tough. They're really fast. This was their warrior stock. This is who they put. And the Tyranids also secrete like a hormone or something that enslaves the Zoats. So they mention that Zoat rebellions aren't unheard of, but they're very rare because of the hormone manipulation stuff that they kind of secrete. So stat-wise, Zoats are pretty mean, man. Movement 7, weapon skill 5, BS3, strength 4, toughness 5. So again, the base toughness in this game was actually 3, so a toughness 5 is pretty scary. They had 3 wounds and 2 attacks each, and they were pretty smart and were hard to break with a leadership 10. So, man, Tyranids were mean. They have definitely been tweaked over time, but again, for their warrior class, the Zoats, the warrior slave class, those guys were mean. The next section goes over more stuff in the warp. I didn't highlight anything too much, but there were a couple things I wanted to call out here. Being a psyker in Rogue Trader, always dangerous. You always had to worry about the warp creatures coming in and eating your face. One of those creatures was an astral hound, as you can see here. They'd come in, they'd bite you, and then they drag you off to the warp. Well, their bite was a paralyzing thing, and they drag you off to the warp and then eat you. Astral specters would actually possess you, and that's why they have a stat line here where they bump up your stats based on the base race there. They also talk about a race called the Enslavers, which are actually these things. Based on the description, man, they sound a lot like D&D beholders, but without the eye stalks. They just had tentacles. But man, they did a lot of the same stuff. Psychic attack, maybe a cross between a beholder and a mind flayer. Again, written around the same time as a lot of those other games. You can definitely see the influence here in the borrowing. But it being an RPG, it kind of makes sense that they would have other stuff. But Enslavers are creepy, man. Very creepy. Moving on to these giant wasp things, and vampires were apparently very common, and they could change shape. So not only did they show up in the old world from the old folklore of Terra, but also throughout different races. popping up Eldar, and whatever society the vampires were in, they'd actually take over and you know, do what vampires do. Their basic look too is also bat-like, but because of the shape change ability, they could assume the shape of any familiar human-sized creature that they're around. So again, they could be orc vampires or Eldar vampires or human vampires. So pretty crazy. Other warp entities, they were pretty crazy and random. Again, warp stuff. So zombies, alien creatures, they go over more. There's a couple I did want to call out. They had carnivorous sand clams, which were used in game. They function a lot like minefields, where you would kind of be like, all right, there's an objective in the middle of the sand pit, and there's these killer clams, and if you got bit by one, they would drag you down, and you'd have to blow it up or escape to escape. So, yeah, Catachin Devil, he's still around here. The Catachin Face Eater, this is probably my favorite creature that I read about. The thing's basically a carnivorous towel. So obviously from Catachin, it's a death world. What these things do is they like warm, dry places. So they would kind of hang out in your bathtub or in the bathroom. And when you go to like reach for a towel when you're washing their face, they would jump on you and just eat your face. So I thought that was pretty hilarious. So again, role-playing aspect, watch out for those towels, man. Crawlers, crocodilids, whatever. So crocodiles have the giant cuddle bear. He's an owl bear, but he's meaner because it's 40k. It's the grimdark version. So dinosaurs were a thing. This was cool. Genestealers right here. That's the original Genestealer, as you can see here. It talks about. I mean, it's basically the thing from Aliens. Again, the xenomorph from Aliens. They would impregnate themselves, or they would impregnate the host mate, they call them, with an egg, and then the egg would steal the gene material from that person, eventually burst through the host and take on some of the aspects of the host. So they talk about a first-gen Genestealer always looks like this, whereas as you go progressively from the second through fourth generation, if they just kept going with human mates, for lack of a better word, I should say victims, I guess. If you kept going with human victims, then eventually they would start to look more and more human. By the fourth generation, you know, they would pass for human, except if you got a close look, they'd have a weird stare, sharp teeth, and kind of a bluish tint to their skin. So, kind of creepy. They are from the moon of Yarmgul, which is, again, a throwback. They keep coming back to Yarmgul Genestealers, or that's the original whatever for Genestealers, but they don't tie them in with Tyranids at all. So, very interesting there. It's like they wrote this guy in and they thought he was so cool that they wanted to incorporate it into more of the 40k universe. So that's when the Nid stuff got it tied in. So Genestealers, creepy. Other alien stuff, pretty much, you know, not as much fun as the Genestealer or the Catachin Face Eater. So I'm just going to skip through some of this stuff. Groxes, Grinks, they talk about, that's a giant cat. That's right, for all you cat lovers out there. I have a cat, so that'd be scary. I always say that if cats were the size of horses, they would kill us. So that's the cat that's the size of a horse. pretty crazy. Yeah, large cat. Horses, lashworms, mimics. Yeah, Terra Scroller, razor wings. That's a throwback. The Beastmasters of Dark Eldar have razor wing flocks that they have, and razor wing is just kind of a catch-all terminology for these bird-like creatures that just chop you up. Rippy fish and swarms. Again, Tyranid rippers, swarms. You can kind of see the throwback here. So, sunworms, alien plants. They go over more. This is more for Death World stuff as far as the type of flora and fauna you would find on a Death World. That's why they have all these different Catachin brainleaf. That's why they have all these different pictures of different fungus and fauna that's just deadly. Yeah. So, more stuff. Goes over the Death World in more detail. Like I was saying, flora and fauna. Creature charts. This is over a random generation if you want to, random encounters for the party. Because again, more of RPG style stuff. Yeah, plant charts, different stuff there. More awesome 80s artwork. Gotta love it. I love the fact that it's an Eldar guy with a squat guy, and I guess it's an astropath plugged in. And there's some guys in power armor. Again, I'm not saying they were not Marines, but power armor was different in Rogue Trader. Any race could really get a hold of power armor. So, yeah, kind of interesting. It looks like they're planning their assault on some alien planet there. So, again, more pictures to kind of get you in the mood. This stuff reminds me of post-apocalyptic town stuff. I was thinking of the scene from the Book of Eli where the guy's walking through the middle of town and everybody's looking at him. Stuff like that. It's a very Necromunda vibe, obviously. So, yeah, the game Necromunda. More awesome artwork here to kind of show you the different stuff. This section goes more over into the advanced mechanics of the game. So I'm going to skim through this section real quick because I kind of covered the rules in the first one. Again, it's just more advanced rule stuff. Random targeting, random dice, fast dice throwing. They talk about it even back in Rogue Trader, how it's okay to roll piles of dice. If you want to do more complicated stuff like hidden movement, stuff like that, duck back and shock, indirect fire, corrective aiming, compulsory move, multi-sided games. I wish they would bring more stuff back like that. I think multi-sided gaming is fun. It can be really complicated, but they have a chart here, which, yeah. Anyway, multi-sided gaming. I wish more game studios would do that, but yeah, it does lead to a lot of complication as far as who's going when and stuff like that. So I get it. They talk more about campaigns, planetary landings, going through all the different campaigns. I think I'm getting to somebody's mentioned it in another comment here, but again, more campaign stuff. The plot generator. I don't know who you were in the comments, but thanks for pointing this out. I wanted to get to it, but I was saving it till now. The random plot generator is pretty nuts. There's some pretty fun stuff in here. It's several different D100 charts that you would roll to figure out why your player motives are, what they were, you know, as far as like reprisal to get back at them, or capture and hold an installation or site, stuff like that. But you would roll that, and then you'd roll in the chart to see whatever. They had stuff like planetary governors, daughters kidnapped, they put down a rebellion, all those type of things, and the charts keep going. There's a lot of really cool stuff in here that I wish I had more time to just read through and have a Bull's story time where I go through some of the stuff. But it's pretty funny. Some of them are more serious than others, but the random plot generator, talking about forging a narrative, GW gave you that right here, guys. You see it first edition, forging that narrative, the reasoning behind all the madness. So, fun stuff. And then, of course, the subplots. So, naturally, if you got a plot generator, you got to have some subplots, right? So, random stuff that you want to... if you want, you can add them to substitute, or you can add these in there to spice it up even more, or add in, add in some flavor of your own. So, yeah. Rick Presley, everybody. It's awesome glasses, dude. So, this section goes over painting and modeling more. This is kind of a more color section. Well, that page anyway. They go over color theory and stuff like that. It's this typical stuff you see in the... Used to put them a lot in the GW stuff, supplements or the main rule book about painting and modeling and all the different tools you'll need and how to clip a sprue. Some color stuff, basing your models, all that fun stuff. Different techniques for painting. We're not going to go into all that because I do tabletop readies as well. And anyway, also color chart. They give you some tips here. This is kind of neat if you want to learn how to shade stuff. It's just a real basic chart. Give you some basic art tips there. We've come a long way, I will say that much. They go over modeling and different making your own terrain, which I thought was kind of neat. And they actually go over, oh, this was a cool picture. This is the studio, the people that worked on it, in kind of a cartoonized version of what they would look like in the 41st millennium. It's pretty sweet. There's Rick again. So, yeah. They did have a female person on staff. I do want to point that out. I did see that. So, What I was getting to about building terrain earlier, they actually give you some steps or some tips on how to build your own terrain. So I thought that was cool. It's in the rule book. Hey, this is how you can make a control tower or a residential block or a dome or whatever. So this section, just more summary stuff. I'll blow through this pretty quick. It's nothing we haven't seen already, but it's just all the different charts and authors' notes on stuff for more background. It's good info. I did read that stuff. It was good stuff. Yeah. More summaries, more background. They go through the timeline of it, and they kind of list it out. The Age of the Imperium, Age of Strife, Dark Age of Technology. They go back 15 millennia. So what is that? The 25th, 25K. So anyway, more charts and stuff. They give a Space Marine briefing. Orc briefing, Orc player brief. So some basic scenarios, some counters for you if you don't have models. You can actually cut those out and use them. A sheet. This sheet actually reminds me a lot of the Necromunda warband sheets. I thought that was kind of funny. Record sheets. So, and this part is probably gonna, man, take you back, folks. Imperial Space Marine box, 10 pounds. Space Orc Raiders, 10 pounds. How the times have changed. Anyway, that's the BoLS Retro Corner review of the 40K Rogue Trader book. It's been a pleasure. Hope you guys have enjoyed the series. If you liked what you've seen so far, if you want to see more stuff like this, give us a like, hang out on the channel, drop some comments. It's been a blast in the Wayback Time Machine going through this with you guys. So again, this is Adam Harry from BoLS, signing off. Have a good one.